dramaturgical analysis. Basically, this is one of the notions in sociology originally offered by Irving Goffman, which is meant to actually analyze social interactions via the theatrical prism, so that this approach suggests that social interactions, social action, essentially can be understood in terms of roles individuals play, and whereas it is mostly rooted in the qualitative approach in sociology, and one can think about maybe the fluid limits of different roles and whether specific roles, even if they are formalized, they can be actually put into something, into a box, into some sort of a definition, or a formal way of actually understanding what a role is. Even that happens, I'm not sure that will actually be an adequate way of understanding the way someone acts. And on a second thought, one can actually assume that entire states, or let's say blocks or organizations, can be thought of in terms of role analysis. And it seems that this is happening in the media analysis, media coverage, where they would say that somebody, or let's say a body, say an organization or a party, whatever it is, would it be more, let's say, proactive or less proactive or reactive, maybe? So that this is some sort of inductive analysis of how, let's say, a collective body acts or behaves, and that would be some sort of an inductive inference how that plays out in the interaction of, or let's say, for instance, a leader, organizational leader is essentially a role. There is not much behind it. At the same time, one can also think whether someone has been a good leader or a bad leader in a given situation. If one thinks about maybe, let's say cooking contest, and if there is team play, there will always be someone playing a leading role as a team leader, and then when there is an analysis how one team did as against the other, there would usually be also thinking, let's say, some sort of an evaluation of how someone in the leader role has actually been acting, whether someone was actually functional, dysfunctional, active, reactive, etc., etc. That even though in many situations there is no clear boundaries or definitions, those would be then maybe in some cases non-formalized and definable after the fact. And in some other cases, let's say if somebody is a dog owner or a cat owner, let's say a pet owner in a European country, in some countries pets increasingly have rights if they are adopted by someone in a household, and they are treated in terms of legal rights as actually parts of the household, and then those owners can necessarily do certain things to those pets, such as violence or neglect or whatever it is, which would harm those beings. And so that in this case, the role of a pet owner, even though it is a very vague one, in maybe everyday life sense, maybe except if they walk a dog outside, and then some countries or cities will have regulations about, let's say, dog poop or whatever it is, so that somebody with a dog walking around on city streets would have to sometimes be obliged to pick up the litter, or pick up the manure, a dog or whatever, and the pet is, and to clean up after the pet. But that will be something legally defined as a role, and then if those rules become more abstract and more encompassing, then it becomes more of a case of formalized role, and then one could, of course, assess socially or economically or legally whether somebody is actually doing his or her role. And I think that in terms of social statuses, in terms of what we say taxpayer, is also a role in some respects, so that one is expected to pay taxes or to do reporting or whatever it is on a regular basis. And this is also a role. It is not necessarily something which is inductive. In other words, it is imposed, so that some roles can be inductive or emergent, or be changing from one point to another, and other roles can be, of course, situational or non-situational, depending on where someone is in the social field. If one thinks of society as a field of play, then one can say that certain people occupy certain points in those fields, and those points actually dictate which roles are available, which roles are not available, etc. In other words, if one thinks of society in terms of economic capital, social capital, etc., then it means that if one has more capital, there could be a wider range of roles one can play. And in contrast, say if someone has less capital, it means that there could be like less roles, or different sets of roles, or different kinds of roles that one can actually play. And then if somebody has a specific type of social capital, that can also mean something very, very different, such as maybe let's say a financial analyst, somebody who does an analysis of the financial markets. And one would have to have some knowledge, some education, some sort of maybe a place in a company or organization doing that type of analysis. And that would be interacting with the ability of someone to claim that role in formal terms, or maybe informal terms, or on the internet, or where it may be, that can be, let's say, understood in very qualitative terms. But then again, a lot of let's say service, a lot of formalized methods of accumulating data about people, about situations. Sometimes would use very basic terms, let's say gradation in terms of income, roles in terms of, let's say, marital interrelations, etc., roles in terms of one is a citizen or a visitor, or tourist, etc. So that those roles could be not necessarily, let's say, social in the way one understands society, but also, let's say, hybrid or theoretical or legalized, or let's say very abstract. And then it can be something of a, let's say, an abstraction which only becomes real in interactions, or when one has to pay a fine, or when one has to pay extra if he or she falls into certain categories. So that those categories can be very abstract and dry and not really existing. But then whenever those categories become embodied and enacted, and that does seem to be like a play, like a theatrical play, which can be very written, let's say very abstract, written on a page, and then it only comes to life whenever an actor picks up the role and plays it out on a stage. So that those stages can be also maybe a more formal, or let's say, or digital, or informal, etc. That I would say, even though it is a very strange approach, it can have its own valid applications.